This is Shadowwood Log 2219. My name is Norton Folgate, representing Shadowwood, an organisation that protects Earth from rifts in time and space, as well as maintaining the place between humans and aliens. I am confronting the Shadowwood agent, Suzanne Berry. She has gone missing in action. She was last seen being pulled into a split caused by a device known as Project Pyramid. Her exact whereabouts is unknown, but she is trapped in an alternative reality, presumed alive. Due to the nature of multi-dimensional physics, this is impossible for Suzanne to be located, and therefore no rescue mission can be carried out. Shadowwood has lost a good agent and a good friend. Terminate log.
She was there. 4 days ago. Right now. Norton reaching out his hand, her trying to resist the pull. Gravitational claws pulling her back with the literal force of a universe. She watched scraps of technology and loose papers fly past her. Then she gave in. She had no strength left. Into the dark, the void. Then, a passing bin lorry shook her room and shook her awake. Her eyes opened to see the peeling wallpaper of the B&B she'd been staying in. She shuffled through her few belongings. A pistol, a few bits of Shadowwood equipment, a phone that couldn't get signal, a debit card that didn't work, and a driver's license that wasn't valid. All these things, out of place, like her. She put on her uniform and began the routine that she'd developed over the past few days. She left the B&B, skipping the breakfast. Suzanne loved an omelet, but she refused to expose herself to whatever the hell the owner was serving up from the kitchen. She likened the parallel world to the brief time she spent in Vietnam. Lots of small differences to what you know. Ones the mind could just skip over, and then a few massive ones. In the case of Vietnam, it was the food she could never get used to. Here, however, it was the fact that no one knew who she was. Most of the people she knew didn't exist, and that aliens living amongst humans is common knowledge. Suzanne still let muscle memory guide her as she walked. Guilford's layout was pretty much the same, and she could probably track down Cafe Nero by scent. Other than Shadowwood, it was surprisingly one of the better jobs she'd had. The boss hired her on the spot, despite her having any formal identification. She stopped when she reached statue, a bronze scholar carrying a pile of books. The statue had been plastered with posters of stereotypical gray alien faces crossed out. They'd been placed almost as if to mock her. The statue that had once been the doors to the wider cosmos, now covered in symbols explicitly stating disinterest in anything beyond Earth. She stood on what was once the invisible lift, but it didn't work. It was the first place she went when she arrived. She spent hours hoping it would spring to life, hoping that she'd descend back into the Shadowwood hub, a place that seemed like a rapidly escaping memory. When she stepped into the cafe, she was comforted by the familiar bouquet of scents, the familiar ambiance. For a chain coffee shop, it had exceptional soul. Suzanne smiled at Reg, was it? The bloke was leaving, having served the shift before her. Reg didn't smile back. I know what you are, teased the man. Suzanne looked up at him, one eyebrow raised. I'm sorry? I overheard the boss. She's got a soft spot for you lot. Suzanne scoffed. My lot? Reg leaned in closer, flecks of spit getting dangerously close to her face. You got the job with no ID, no reference, no real qualifications. Your lot. Piss off, Reg. I'm not a bloody alien, and even if I was, it wouldn't make a difference. Suzanne began to walk away, not wanting to cause any more of a scene. You're lucky old Blake Knowlton ain't here, love, he shouted after her. Suzanne wasn't sure what that meant, but she shot him a look anyway. The berry look, it never failed to strike fear into its victims. Suzanne clicked her knuckles, got behind the counter, and got to work. Her co-worker was Olivia, a college-age girl with dyed red hair, a small badge displaying the words, "Earth is a home for all," with a heart symbol imposed behind it was pinned onto her apron. "Don't take notice of him," said the girl. "He watches way too much Rift Raiders." "Rift Raiders?" questioned Suzanne, unfamiliar with the name. "The reality show." "I'm not a big fan of reality TV. Beats the point of having a telly in the first place, if you ask me." "I don't get how you've never heard of it, though." Her speech trailed off for a second, and then she blurted out, "Unless you are an alien, and that would be fine with me, but, I mean, if you were, I'd understand why you wouldn't want to watch." "Right. And why's that?" "Well," Olivia paused, obviously upset, "they torture aliens. They catch them and they sell them off to the government or whatever, and people watch. Everyone watches." Suzanne stepped back. The shock on her face was apparent. "I'll be back in a second." Suzanne rushed into the staff room and booted up the company computer. She typed Rift Raiders into the search engine and clicked on the first episode that popped up. A cheesy rock riff blared out of the speakers whilst images of different aliens flashed up on the screen. Some she recognized, most she didn't. And then, a man's voice. "Aliens, outside your window yet beyond belief. We track down alien threats on Earth and use them to arm humanity against the invaders. Live at the Guilford Rift is where everything happens, and the Rift Raiders are ready." The picture then changed to a seemingly live feed. A handsome mid-30ish man grinned at the camera. Behind him, an imposingly large church towered above him, the sky poisoned gray by its presence. Not that it seemed to affect the man. He spoke in an overacted, overexcited manner, and with the same voice from the intro. "Hi, I'm Blake Nelson, and you're watching Rift Raiders. Our state-of-the-art rift monitoring technology has picked up major activity from this location. Now, it's just a theory, but we believe that inside those walls is a grade 7 emotion eater, the likes of which we haven't seen since way back in Series 5. A catch like this is sure to rake in big bucks on the auction." Blake and the camera turned to a group of well-armed, armored men. "Right then, gang. All set?" He was still talking in that tacky fashion, despite what he was about to do. "This is a textbook mission. Just get in, apprehend the extraterrestrials, and take it back to the studio." The men responded in a chorus of grunts and nods. The camera switches to Blake's chest cam. One of the soldiers passed a weapon to him that was a sort of cross between a rifle and a loudspeaker. Blake led the charge, kicking down the church door. The black-clad people inside cowered behind the pews. It was a funeral. Blake fired a shot directly above the coffin. The energized sound wave rippled through the air before hitting a previously invisible beast, exposing its true form. The creature was perched upon the coffin, its body like an oversized rat with matted black fur and shards of bone jutting from its spine. In place of a head was just a skull. Its blank eyes sat deep within the empty sockets. The creature's jaw hung open, feeding on the mourner's grief, its large bat-like wings covering the crucifix on the wall. Blake and the soldiers opened fire. The Emotion Eater made no attempt to fight back. It just shrieked in pain. It seemed to be stunned. Its body stayed stationary, but its wings shook in spasmodic bursts. The shrieking became a gargled choke as a silver, vicious liquid began to pour out of its mouth, making a terrible sound as the fluid impacted the stone floor below. Suzanne had to turn off the computer. Shadowwood had a kill count, but this wasn't a fight. This was barbarism. Suzanne chucked her coat over her uniform and began to stride out of the cafe. "Suze!" her co-worker shouted as Suzanne was halfway through the door. "Where are you going?" Suzanne turned to face her, gave her a weak smile, then stepped out. A few hours later, night had fallen, and Suzanne boarded the empty 37 bus. Her pockets were full of her old Shadowwood equipment, but she'd left the gun at the B&B. Suzanne was capable of taking lives, but she took no pleasure in it. Leaving the gun behind would force her to find alternatives. She checked her bus route again, and then went over the plan in her head. She jolted forward slightly as the bus stopped at the edges of the industrial estate. She wandered down the long stretches of monotonous gray pavements, bordered by warehouses or dead grass, until she came across a sign. Rift Raiders Studio A. She stopped for a second, contemplating. If something went wrong on this mission, there would be no one there to bail her out. No one to swoop in and save her. She was alone. The car park was empty, and the building looked so too. She followed the basic Shadowwood stakeout procedures before approaching the complex in relative confidence. As she approached the large, reinforced glass doors of the facility, she pulled a small metallic cylinder from one of her coat pockets. She unscrewed it along a seam in the center of the device, separating it into two pieces. Bolts of electricity danced between the pair. She clutched them in the palm of her hand, inhaled the night air, and chucked the gadget into the building. For a split second, the structure was engulfed with electricity, the harsh white light blinding Suzanne. The energy dissipated and the cylinders dropped to the floor. Suzanne beamed with satisfaction when she saw the doors had opened and the security cameras had burned out. The cylinder smoldered in an orange glow on the pavement. She picked it up and placed it back in her pocket, hoping it had enough charge to be used again, should she need it. Suzanne entered through the reception and explored the empty office. It struck her how ordinary it all was. Desks organized in rows, each desk with a computer, piles of paperwork, and the occasional empty mug. She approached the main desk. A world map was placed upon it with 16 crosses marked in different locations. One in Guildford, one in Cardiff, one in Nepal, a few in America, South Africa, the rest either in the ocean or dotted around Antarctica. She'd seen similar marks on the map in Shadowwood Hub. They were rifts, the exposed wounds of the universe letting in any manner of strange, wonderful, and dangerous life forms. Suzanne picked up a booklet that was covering the upper part of the map. She thumbed through it quickly. It was a sales pitch. They were planning on expanding the show worldwide. She turned to profit margins, confirming they weren't just exporting the show, but exporting the aliens. Genetically altering them, selling them to security and military organizations, using them as weapons. She remembered the howls of pain from the Emotion Eater. To be hurt like that and then forced to serve? It was inhumane. She ran her fingers under the desk and was met with a cold metal button. She smiled before pressing it to hear the hissing sound of hydraulics emanating from beneath her. In a blast of white gas, the desk and the floor around it began to descend. As she watched the seemingly endless shaft paneling fall past her, a sinister thought dawned. What if this was the invisible lift? What if this was the closest thing to Shadowwood? The only line of defense? She was hit by a wave of chokingly hot air as the hidden lift entered the hidden section of the facility. She stepped off the platform and it began to rise back up, seemingly by means of anti-gravity. She was standing in the center of a circular room, completely featureless other than 4 steel doors facing each other at opposite points on the wall. She found herself drawn through the south door marked Containment, where she met with rows upon rows of transparent cells. The only light in the room was the neon red glow that emanated from each of the cells, most of which containing a single isolated life form. Some of the aliens were thrashing and throwing themselves at the reinforced Perspex glass. She ventured further and further, more and more aliens, all in a state of distress. She stopped when she felt rooting through her mind. Shadowwood had trained her to know when she was under psychic attack. But this felt different. She felt her worry and concern slowly drift from her consciousness. In the corner of her eye, she saw the culprit, its skeletal jaw open, forced into a cell that was far too small with the emotion eater. Suzanne approached it and placed her hand on its container. The beast pressed its head up on the glass. Suzanne felt the creature's presence exit her mind. The emotion eater was starved, and Suzanne would sustain it for a while, but the others didn't have that option. She had to free them, starting here. At least she would have if she hadn't heard the oncoming footsteps. Suzanne darted behind the emotion eater's containment cell, obscuring herself behind cramped wings. 2 people and 2 voices accompanied the footsteps. One was a gaunt man in a suit with a shock of gray hair upon his head. The other, a younger woman dressed in a long leather duster jacket. "I just don't understand why you're asking us to pay now," said the woman. "Frost has always been supportive of this project, and you've never made us pay for assets before." "Yes, well, times change," responded the man, his voice worn with age. "I'm planning on expanding internationally, and that means I can't give you special treatment anymore. You're going to have to pay like everyone else." A distant alarm began to ring out from somewhere within the labyrinth complex. "Sorry, security went down earlier. I thought it was just a technical issue, but it must be an intruder," the man stated grimly. The 2 dashed off past the columns of alien prisoners. Suzanne would have to return some other time. This would have been an easy job for Shadowwood. But she wasn't Shadowwood. Not anymore. She tried to plan out an escape route. The only exit she knew was the main entrance, and that was sure to be guarded by now, meaning she'd have to use brute force in order to get out that way. Not a great strategy when you're completely unarmed. A hand grabbed her shoulder. "Run!" Suzanne did as instructed, the intruder alarms now blaring as she struggled to take in the humid air. She tried to make out who was the rescuer, but as she ran through the underground prison, all she could see was their high-vis jacket emblazoned with the words, "Rift Raiders." Distant shouts began to get louder as security stormed the facility. Suzanne and her liberator reached a wall where a panel lifted away, revealing a staircase. She was dragged up the stairs and into the frigid night. Suzanne felt soft ground beneath her feet. She was looking out onto the city, twinkling in the dark. She recognized the place immediately. It was the Mount. Her dad used to take her up this hill as a child. Suzanne turned to the stranger, still obscured in the darkness. Suzanne tried to speak through heavy breaths. Thanks. How did we... The outsider interrupted her. Transspatial escape corridor. I installed it myself. Suzanne's sweat turned to ice. The stranger spoke with a voice she'd hoped she'd never have to hear again. "Step out where I can see you," Suzanne demanded, picking up a rock and brandishing it as if it was a weapon. The stranger stepped forward and confirmed her fears. "You?" Suzanne exclaimed before laughing almost maniacally. "Everyone I know never even existed in this universe. Why the hell are you the only one? How do you factor into this, Ro-Jedda?" Ro-Jedda's eyes were lit with fear. Where did you learn my name?" she stuttered. "Don't play games with me," Suzanne spat. "I've been stuck here alone, completely alone. I don't even exist. Everyone I used to know might as well be dead. My home, my job, my life, it's gone. And that's down to you, isn't it? Well, whatever scheme you've got planned, it's not happening. Take me back to my world, or I swear to God I'll feed you to the bloody crows. Suzanne noticed the rock in her hand raised to strike Ro-Jedda, and she noticed the tears running down Ro's face. I don't know what you're speaking of. All I wish was to help, whimpered Ro. Sometimes you can tell when someone is innocent. Suzanne dropped the rock and embraced the shivering wreck of a woman. I know, love, comforted Suzanne. I'm so sorry. This world's Ro-Jedda was a good person. Suzanne knew that now. It was just a shame that they shared their face with evil. Suzanne slipped the spare key into the door of the cafe and held it open for Ro-Jedda. Suzanne wasn't sure why her boss placed so much trust in her and why she wasn't complaining. Suzanne and Ro had barely spoken in the cab, and not that they had anything they wanted to say that could be spoken about in public. But Suze switched on the large lamp in the corner of the cafe and allowed the rest of the lighting to be done by the outside lampposts. Ro-Jedda removed her high-vis jacket and sat herself on a large leather seat. Suzanne came with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Ro, and then taking the opposite chair. I suppose I owe you an explanation, said Suzanne. She detailed everything, her life before Shadowwood, so innocent yet so much more mundane. Her time protecting Earth alongside Norton. How she had to kill her universe's version of Ro-Jedda, and how a rogue science experiment led to the days she'd spent in a world that doesn't remember her. Ro-Jedda seemed to absorb every word, both intrigued and troubled. So I'm sat drinking coffee with my killer? Questioned Ro. No, Suzanne answered. You're completely different people. I know that now. You put your life at risk to save me, a stranger. The Ro-Jedda of my world would have left me for dead. The 2 women sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the calm of the sleeping city and the scent of their coffee. Suzanne broke the silence. Why did you save me, Ro? Ro-Jedda shifted in her seat and began to talk, her face illuminated for a second by the headlights of the passing car. I was forced to flee my home world. I braved the storms and seas of space to come here to Earth. When people speak of this world, they speak of safety and acceptance, and when I arrived, I was met with hatred and oppression. I was forced to choose between concealing myself from the authorities or becoming a second-class citizen. I become quite adept at hiding over the years. The actions of the Rift Raiders disgust me, but it's also the last place you'd look. So I joined, eventually becoming head technician at the facility. Throughout the years, I've covertly implemented features into the structure that would allow me to sabotage the Rift Raiders' operations. And when you arrived and used your device to disable the external security, I correctly assumed that's where an alien coming to liberate your brethren. Suzanne interrupted. You correctly assumed? Yes. You claim to be from another world. Thus, you are an alien. Suzanne had never thought of it like that. But Ro wasn't wrong. As I was saying, Ro-Jedda continued, when you arrived, I disabled the biometric lock on the main entrance, allowing you into the facility. I also activated the intruder alarm in Armory, allowing me to rescue you. I thought you were capable of freeing our captive compatriots, and I still do. Suzanne sank into her chair, defeated. I'm so sorry I let you down. Back in my world at Shadowwood, we would have dealt with this. Ro-Jedda got up from her chair. There is no Shadowwood, the alien announced. Not here. You will have to learn to fight without them, but that doesn't mean you'll have to learn to fight alone. I'll contact you tomorrow when they leave to film. Then we'll complete what you set out to do. Just as she went to leave, Ro-Jedda turned around. Oh, and bring your gun this time. It might be necessary. Suzanne furrowed her brow. How did you know I had disappeared almost as if she had come in the air? Suzanne was unsurprised, for she'd seen much stranger things with Shadowwood. She'd finished her coffee and locked up the cafe. The sun had begun to rise on a new day. Suzanne was genuinely terrified that she would never see it rise again. Suzanne stood at the edge of the Rift Raiders car park. She carefully surveyed the dull industrial studio buildings. The area around it was a wasteland of concrete and dead grass, with the occasional warehouse obstructing the view, the countryside and the distant Guildford cityscape. She placed her duffel bag on the pavement to save her arms further strain. Her day at work had been a blur. She was unable to concentrate, too busy planning in her head or checking in on the bag to make sure none of the staff had looked inside. The second her shift ended, she caught the bus to the studio. She'd been waiting around that car park for 3 hours at that point, checking her phone over and over, hoping to see Ro-Jedda's name appear, giving her the go-ahead to begin their raid on the complex. The distant slamming of doors and revving of engines caused Suzanne to grip the handle of the bag. She held up the phone and waited for the text. Message from Ro. Wait for trucks to leave, then enter. Doors are open. Almost as if on command, a convoy of black SUVs trundled past. When Suzanne made eye contact with one of the drivers, her stomach dropped. Why the hell hadn't she thought of this? All the training she'd done, and she decided to wait right outside the building that she was planning on breaking into after already having failed to break into it once before? She went to unzip the duffel bag. She refused to go in without a fight. But the trucks drove straight past. She let out a sigh of relief and zipped the bag back up. She made her way to the desk entrance and into the underground facility. Ro-Jedda was standing near the open containment door, watching the silhouettes shift in the scarlet light. "Did you bring the tools I requested?" asked Ro-Jedda. "Yeah. I had to pick them up from the B&B on my lunch break," responded Suzanne. She placed the bag on the floor, opening it, revealing 2 sets of wrenches and a pair of crowbars. "I brought this, too." Suzanne held the pistol in the air. Ro-Jedda smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent," she affirmed. "We have approximately 5 hours and 40 prisoners to free. We must free them one by one to avoid chaos. Those who are intelligent shall help us with the operation. The rest will be sedated and escorted out via the escape corridor." "Well, I couldn't have thought of a better plan myself," said Suzanne, whilst passing Ro-Jedda a crowbar. Ro handed her a yellow canister marked with the word trank. Ro approached one of the containment cells and demonstrated how to do the procedure. She slid the crowbar beneath the door section of the cylindrical cell, overwhelming its hydraulic components and opening it slightly. She released a small amount of tranquilizer gas into the chamber. Once its insectoid occupant seemed to be under the effect of the gas, Ro lifted the door section fully upwards and carried the being out, presumably taking it towards the escape corridor. Suzanne set out to do the same. The imprisoned alien looked far heavier than she could carry, but under sedation she might have been able to drag it. Suzanne found herself struggling even before she got to the escorting phase, and despite putting all her weight into the crowbar, the door refused to give. She stepped away for a second to regain her breath when she heard Ro-Jedda's quickly approaching footsteps. "Is everything okay?" asked Suzanne. Ro-Jedda shouted back in despair, still running. "Somebody short-circuited the escape corridor. We've been compromised. You need to—" The rest of her words were muffled. Suzanne dropped the crowbar and raised her pistol. She turned in a circle, hoping to pick out Ro or their attackers. 3 figures emerged from between some of the containment cells. A much larger 4th figure remained behind a cell. Suzanne could pick out the outlines of many others hiding throughout the containment room. She recognized all 3 of the people who stepped forward. Blake Nelson's, Ro-Jedda, and the gaunt man from the night before. Blake was holding a gun against Ro-Jedda's back and a hand over her mouth. The older man stood in front of them, his face pale and angular. "I suppose this isn't the best of introductions, is it? You may refer to me as Director Jackson, and you, it appears, are trespassing on my property." Suzanne pointed her pistol directly at the man's forehead. Blake broke into laughter. "Oh, and wouldn't you do that, sweetheart? Little girls like you shouldn't be playing with big boy toys," he sniggered in a voice completely different to that he used on TV. "I'm sorry about the derogatory way my employee spoke to you," explained Jackson, genuinely flustered by the actions of his subordinate. "We're here at Rift Raiders believe all humans deserved respect. Although Mr. Nelson is an imbecile, he is also correct in this situation. It would be better for all of us if you dropped your weapon. Suzanne didn't falter. If I pull the trigger, I won't miss. Let her go and then we'll talk. She tried to suppress it, but her voice quivered. Jackson, seemingly unaffected by the threat of death, turned to the shadows where the larger figure loomed, his lips curled into a sneer. Here, boy! Meet the freak, Blake screeched in deranged excitement as the floor began to shudder with every step of the figure. Ro-Jedda's eyes widened in horror. A towering beast stepped out from the shadows. Although humanoid in shape, it was anything but human. Its skin sagged off its bones and took on a translucent gray tone. Black, tumorous growths completely consumed its face. Wires and other pieces of technology were painfully melded into its flesh. Suzanne, trembling, dropped her gun. What the hell is that thing? Jackson's face was filled with contentment. Well, I wouldn't be a very trustworthy businessman if I didn't use my own products now, would I? Suzanne fell to her knees, overcome by the monstrosity of both the creature and of Director Jackson. When she looked at the abomination, all she could think about was the Emotion Eater's shrieks of pain. So this is what you do? Suzanne whimpered. You take living things and turn them into that? Jackson's contentment turned to rage. When these aliens come to Earth, they bring nothing. They contribute nothing. If protection is the only thing they can supply us with, then they are obliged to supply it. Blake had subconsciously removed his hand from Ro-Jedda's face, allowing her to speak. Most of us don't arrive here by choice. I did, and I wish I'd gone anywhere else. This planet is filthy. All you do is consume and consume. Your whole lives are built on the suffering of others, and none of you care. None of you! This, shouted Jackson through grated teeth. This is the problem. You come here on your own accord. We sure as hell never asked for you. And you have the guts to critique our way of life? Search them for weapons, then detain them. Armed men in gray urban camo emerged from throughout the room and began patting down the two women. One of them stopped at Suzanne's coat pocket. I found something, he announced. He shoved his hand into the pocket and produced a small metallic cylinder. I think it's some sort of micro-explosive. I'll see if I can dismantle it. Suzanne gave Ro a knowing look. She hoped to God her little machine had enough charge. Electricity erupted from between the two components, causing the soldier to jump. Dropping the device, the whole room was engulfed in white light and then plunged into darkness. Everyone stood frozen in near complete silence. The only sound was the heavy wheezing of Jordan's mutant. And then, a hissing sound from somewhere deep within the complex. Then another hiss, much closer. Then another and another, multiplying into a serpent's chorus, the hiss of hydraulic doors. They're loose! They're all loose! One of the soldiers cried. The room erupted into a cacophony of snarls and screams, gunshots and growls. The only light came from the barrels of guns, giving Susan only split-second snapshots of her surroundings. She saw Blake being launched into one of the cells, hitting it with an awful crunch. Suzanne grabbed Ro by the hand. "Let's go now!" she screamed with all the air left in her body. The pair ran through the whirling crowds in the pitch black. Ro-Jedda was leading either due to her knowledge of the facility layout or due to some special ability that would go alongside her apparently inhuman-level strength. Despite the deafening sounds of around them, Suzanne and Ro-Jedda remained untouched. They reached the circular room and threw themselves on the central platform. The power came back on just as the platform began to rise. They saw the Emotion Eater below them, fighting off the hordes, protecting them. The women didn't speak as they rose back to the surface, the screams growling even more distant. They stepped off the platform and into the office, the room given a sickly yellow tint by its flickering tube lights. Director Jordan was hunched over, his torn-up suit covered in blood, supporting himself on a desk. He looked up at Suzanne and Ro and smiled a crooked smile. Flesh was lodged between his red-stained teeth. "The things I had to do to get out of there, and you two took the lift," he choked on a laugh. "That's bloody typical. I've set the place into permanent lockdown. The facility is sealed, forever. A neurotoxin has entered the ventilation system. They're all dead. Humans, aliens, all dead. Is that what you wanted? Whatever little terrorist group you work for? Do they win now? All you invaders do is take and take. You've taken my show, my business, my reputation. My life is over, and that's on you. Ro-Jedda leaned over to face him. None of this would have happened if you'd just seen life as life. Not something to own or profit from, just life, made valuable simply by the fact it exists. Jordan's eyes smoldered. Get out! And so they left. The two women stood on the roof of the cafe, each with a mug in hand. What happens now then? Are we wanted? Asked Suzanne. Ro-Jedda shook her head. I shouldn't think so. Jordan will try to cover this up if he wants to maintain any public credibility. The real question is, what happens to us? Do we just go back to how it was, living in worlds that aren't our own? No, I'm going to find Shadowwood, and I'm going to get home, somehow. I shall follow the same path. There's nothing for me here on this world, and if you'll have me, that is. Suzanne put her hand on Ro's shoulder. Of course I will. There's a lot of work to be done.